My daughter kicked me out of her home. To justify her cruelty, she told our family a vicious lie, a humiliating, degrading lie about my personal hygiene. She thought her caring performance would fool everyone. She didn't know I was making one quiet phone call to an official who deals with liars like her every single day. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Dorothy Powell, and for 71 years, I had prided myself on my independence. It was the bedrock of my character, a quiet strength I had cultivated through a lifetime of work as a church secretary, through 40 years of a loving marriage to my late husband, Robert, and through a decade of dignified widowhood. My small, neat home was my kingdom, my garden my solace, my ability to care for myself my most cherished possession. Then came the ice. A single patch of black ice on my own front steps, a moment of misplaced footing, and in an instant my world was shattered. A broken hip, the doctor had said, a common but cruel injury for a woman my age. The surgery was a success, but the verdict that followed was a sentence I was unprepared for. Dorothy, Dr. Evans had said, his face kind but his words firm, your recovery will be long. For the next 2, maybe 3 months, you absolutely cannot live alone. You'll need daily assistance with everything from bathing to meals. You need full-time care. The words struck me with a terror far greater than the fall itself. I had no one. My sister lived 2 states away, my friends were all my own age, battling their own frailties. There was only my daughter Monique. My relationship with Monique, my only child, had become strained in recent years. At 43, she was a successful, ambitious HR manager at a large corporation, married to a respectable accountant, her life a pristine, minimalist showcase of modern success. She was also impatient, easily annoyed, and had come to view my simple traditional ways with a barely concealed condescension. But she was my daughter, and she was my only hope. From my hospital bed, I made the most difficult phone call of my life. I had to plead. I described the doctor's orders, the reality of my helplessness, my desperate need for a place to recover. On the other end of the line, I was met not with an immediate loving "of course, Mama," but with a long, heavy sigh. "Oh, Mom," Monique had said, her voice a mixture of exasperation and reluctant duty. "A broken hip? That's a huge complication right now. We're so busy at work." I could hear her whispering to her husband, Mark, in the background. I heard the words "immense burden," and "for how long?" But what choice did they have? To refuse would be a social taboo, a black mark on the perfect image she so carefully cultivated. And so, with a sigh so deep it felt like a judgment, she agreed. "All right, Mama," she'd said, her voice full of a martyred resignation. "Of course you'll come stay with us. We'll figure it out." The day they brought me to their home was not a comfort but a new kind of humiliation. They lived in a large, cold house that felt more like an art gallery than a home, all glass and steel and shades of gray. There was no warmth, no soul. My temporary room was a small, sterile guest room at the back of the house, far from the main living areas. My presence from the very first day was treated as an unwelcome disruption to their perfect, orderly lives. Monique's care was a performance of resentful obligation. My requests for help to get to the bathroom were met with impatient sighs. The meals she provided were often just the cold leftovers from their own dinners. She made it abundantly clear in 1,000 small ways that I was a burden. "Mama, are you sure you need another glass of water?" she'd ask, as if my thirst were a personal failing. I just sat down. "Try not to make a mess with your pills, Mom," she'd say, placing them just out of my easy reach. I tried to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible. I was a guest in my daughter's house, a supplicant for her care, and the shame of my own dependence was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. I was a prisoner of my own broken body, and my daughter was my reluctant, resentful jailer. I spent my days in that quiet, gray room, my heart aching with a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical pain, counting the minutes until I could be independent again, until I could return to my own home, my own life. I had no idea that my daughter had no intention of ever letting that happen, and that she was about to invent a new, more monstrous reason to justify her desire to be rid of me for good. The first month of my convalescence at Monique's house was a slow, grinding humiliation. My hip was healing, but my spirit was in a state of steady decline. I was trapped, dependent on my daughter's resentful care, a constant low-level friction in the gears of her perfect high-powered life. Her sighs grew heavier, her patience thinner. She began talking about my recovery not in terms of weeks, but in vague, ominous terms of the long haul. I just don't know how we're going to manage this long-term, Mark. I overheard her whispering to her husband one evening. She's so needy. It's a constant interruption. I, who had managed an entire church office, who had raised her single-handedly after her father passed, who had never asked for a thing, was needy. The word stung. The incident that Monique would later twist into her most vicious weapon began with an act of her own careless indulgence. She came home one evening with several cartons of fiery, exotic-looking Thai food, a celebration of some minor victory at her corporate job. "I brought dinner," she announced, her voice full of a rare, cheerful energy. I looked at the food, my stomach clenching with apprehension. The scent of chili and lemongrass was overpowering. "Oh, honey," I said gently from my wheelchair where I spent most of my days. "That looks wonderful, but you know I can't eat anything that's spicy. My stomach. It's been so sensitive with all the pain medication." Monique's cheerful demeanor instantly vanished, replaced by a familiar, tight-lipped annoyance. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mama. It's not that spicy. Can't you just try to enjoy something for once? I'm tired of cooking you separate bland meals every single night. Just pick around the chilies." Her tone left no room for argument. To refuse would be to be difficult, to be ungrateful. So with a deep sense of foreboding, I ate a small portion of the rice and a few pieces of chicken, carefully avoiding the visible peppers. It didn't matter. Within an hour my stomach was in knots. The spices, as I had feared, had unleashed a terrible war within my digestive system. For the next several hours, I was hit with a sudden, violent, and utterly humiliating bout of digestive distress. It was a one-time acute reaction to the food she had insisted I eat. With Mark's reluctant help, I managed the bathroom trips, my face burning with a shame so profound I could barely speak. By the next morning, though I was weak and exhausted, the episode was over. I thought it was done, a single awful night to be forgotten. But Monique did not forget. She nurtured it. She cultivated it. She saw it not as the result of her own thoughtlessness, but as an opportunity, a weapon. A few days later, she began her campaign. I overheard her on the phone with her sister-in-law, her voice a low, dramatic murmur of feigned tragedy. "Susan, you have no idea what I'm dealing with," she sighed. "It's the incontinence. It's constant. I'm doing laundry all day, every day. I can't." The lie was so breathtaking, so audacious, I felt the air leave my lungs. She had taken a single food-induced incident and twisted it into a chronic, degrading medical condition. She was painting a picture of me as a helpless, senile old woman, incapable of even basic bodily control. It escalated quickly. She started leaving large, conspicuous packages of adult diapers on my dresser. When I tearfully insisted I did not need them, she would look at me with a practiced, pitying expression. "Mama, please," she'd say softly. "There's no shame in it. It happens at your age. We just need to manage this before you have another messy accident." She used this lie as a tool to further isolate me. When my dear friend Janice called to arrange a visit, Monique intercepted the call. "Oh, Janice," she'd said, her voice full of false regret. "I'm afraid today isn't a good day. We're having some personal care challenges with Mother. It's best if she doesn't have visitors right now. It can be embarrassing for her." She was building a case. She was creating a narrative, a story of a daughter nobly, heroically, dealing with a mother's degrading decline. And her lies were chillingly effective. She was not just my caregiver, she was my character assassin. And her weapon of choice was my own deepest sense of shame. With every whispered phone call, every pitying look, she was stripping away my dignity, piece by painful piece, all to build a justification for the final cruel act she was planning. The atmosphere in Monique's house grew more oppressive with each passing day. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my small guest room, a beige prison where I was subjected to a constant barrage of psychological warfare. The lie about my incontinence had become her central talking point, the justification for her every cruel act of control. She spoke of it constantly, her voice a low, dramatic murmur on the phone to friends, her words designed to drift down the hallway to my ears. The cleaning is just endless, I'd hear her sigh. And the smell, some days I can barely face it. She began to treat me with a clinical detachment as if I were no longer her mother, but a difficult case to be managed. She'd leave my food on a tray outside my door, claiming the aroma of my special bland diet upset her husband. She insisted on helping me with my personal care, a help that was a daily, profound humiliation, her every touch impatient, her every word a condescending reminder of my supposed helplessness. My own daughter was making me feel like a disgusting, decaying object. The shame was a constant physical weight, a sickness in my soul that was far worse than my healing hip. I tried to fight back, to assert my own reality. "Monique, that's not true," I'd say, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. "I do not need these diapers. I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself." Her response was always the same, a calm, pitying smile that made my blood run cold. "Oh, Mama," she'd say, shaking her head sadly. "Denial is the hardest part. But we have to face facts. It's for your own good." Her final, devastating move came about 2 months after my fall. She entered my room one afternoon, her face set in an expression of grave, theatrical sorrow. Her husband, Mark, stood silently behind her, a spineless, shame-faced sentinel. "Mama," Monique began, her voice a soft, gentle weapon. "Mark and I have made a very difficult decision. We love you so much. But we can no longer provide you with the level of care you need." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "My hip is healing perfectly. Dr. Evans said I could start physical therapy next week." "It's not about your hip, Mama," she said, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "It's about your other condition. The accidents. The cleaning. It's become a full-time nursing job, and it's not fair to Mark, to our lives. We simply can't handle the immense physical and sanitary burden anymore." I stared at her, speechless. She was using the lie, the monstrous, exaggerated lie she had so carefully constructed, to justify what was coming next. "We found a lovely place for you," she continued, her voice now brighter, more efficient. "The Golden Years apartment complex. It's a senior living facility. They have on-site assistance. It's a much more appropriate environment for someone with your needs." "You're kicking me out?" I whispered, the words a raw, painful scrape in my throat. "You're kicking your own mother out based on a lie?" "It's not a lie, Mother," she snapped, her mask of compassion finally slipping to reveal the cold, hard face of her cruelty beneath. "And it's not kicking you out. It's a care transition. We've already paid the first month's rent and the security deposit. We're moving you on Friday." And they did. Despite my pleas, my tears, my furious, helpless protests, they packed my few approved belongings into boxes. On Friday morning, they drove me to the Golden Years complex, a bleak, cinder-block building on the far side of town that smelled of stale air and quiet despair. They helped me into a small, dark, sparsely furnished apartment, the air thick with the ghosts of 100 other lonely lives. Monique gave me a quick, perfunctory hug. "Now this is better, isn't it?" she said brightly. "You'll have your own space and we won't have to worry so much. We'll call you next week to see how you're settling in." Then they left. They left me, a 71-year-old woman still recovering from major surgery, alone in an unfamiliar building, my heart shattered, my dignity in tatters, my entire world reduced to this one bleak, lonely room. I sank onto the lumpy sofa, the silence of the apartment a deafening roar. They had done it. They had won. They had successfully used a vicious, humiliating lie to discard me, to exile me from their perfect lives. The heartbroken, shamed mother they had so expertly created finally, blessedly, died in that moment. And from her ashes, a new woman began to rise. A woman who had nothing left to lose. A woman filled not with sorrow but with a cold, quiet and absolutely unshakable fury. My daughter had written her narrative. Now it was time for me to write mine. And I knew exactly who my first reader would be. For 3 days, I sat in the bleak, oppressive silence of my new apartment at the Golden Years complex. It was a place where dignity went to die, a warren of identical beige hallways and lonely television-lit rooms. The other residents I saw were shadows, shuffling through their days with a quiet, defeated resignation that I refused to let infect my own soul. My daughter Monique had intended this place to be my final chapter, a place for me to fade away quietly, my spirit broken by her lies and my own shame. She was about to be very disappointed. My grief, the profound, shattering grief of a mother betrayed, had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear purpose. The physical pain in my hip was a constant, dull throb, a reminder of my vulnerability. But my mind, the mind of a woman who had managed a church office for 35 years, the mind that knew the power of facts, of documentation, of quiet, unassailable truth, had never been sharper. I would not engage in a messy, emotional battle with Monique. I would not give her the satisfaction of another hysterical phone call, another tearful confrontation she could twist into further proof of my instability. My war would not be fought with shouts and accusations. It would be fought with a single, calm, deliberate phone call. A phone call to the one authority she could not manipulate, could not dismiss, could not ignore. I spent those 3 days meticulously preparing my case. In my handbag I still had the small notebook I always carried. I began to write. I documented everything. The date of my fall. The date I moved into Monique's house. The date of the spicy food incident. The specific cruel lies she had told about me to me and to others. I wrote down the names of the friends she had spoken to, the dates of her condescending lectures about the diapers I didn't need. I wrote down the exact words she had used when she kicked me out, an immense physical and sanitary burden. Then I thought about my own reality. I was a 71-year-old woman, a recent hip surgery patient, with a doctor's explicit order not to live alone and to have daily assistance. My daughter, my designated caregiver, had willfully, knowingly, abandoned me in an apartment that was not equipped for my recovery, with no plan for my care, based on a fabricated medical condition. She hadn't just been cruel, she had been negligent. Dangerously so. On the 4th day I was ready. I used my simple cell phone, the one they thought I barely knew how to use, and I looked up the number. The State Department of Health and Human Services. The Adult Protective Services, APS. Hotline. My hand was perfectly steady as I dialed. A calm, professional voice answered. Adult Protective Services, how can I help you? Hello, I began, my voice quiet but firm, the voice of a woman making a formal, serious report. My name is Dorothy Powell. I need to report a case of elder abuse, neglect, and abandonment. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply, methodically laid out the facts just as I had written them in my notebook. I gave them my age, my medical condition, the details of my recent surgery. And then I told them about my daughter, Monique Powell-Jones, the successful HR manager, my sole caregiver. I told them about the incident with the spicy food, and the subsequent vicious lie she had constructed about my supposed incontinence. I told them how she had used this lie to justify kicking me out of her home, abandoning me, a recovering surgical patient, in an unsafe, unassisted living situation. The intake worker on the other end of the line listened patiently, her typing a quiet, steady rhythm in the background. She asked clarifying questions. The names of my doctors. The address of Monique's home. And then the most important question. And where does your daughter work, Mrs. Powell? I gave her the name of the large, prestigious corporation, the one where Monique was the head of human resources, the department responsible for ensuring the very well-being and fair treatment of its employees. The irony was so thick, so bitter I could almost taste it. Thank you, Mrs. Powell, the woman said when I had finished. I have filed your report. It will be assigned to a caseworker for an immediate investigation. Someone will be in contact with you shortly. The call was over. I had done it. I had set the wheels of official bureaucratic justice in motion. I had taken my private humiliation and turned it into a formal, documented case file. There was no sense of triumph, not yet. Only a grim, quiet satisfaction. A feeling of a necessary, painful duty performed. Monique had wanted to control the narrative, to paint me as a senile, incompetent old woman. But I had just handed my narrative, my truth, to an organization with the power to investigate, to subpoena, to uncover the facts. I sat in my bleak little apartment, the silence no longer feeling oppressive but watchful. I had planted a seed of truth in the fertile ground of the state's bureaucracy. Now all I had to do was wait for it to grow, to blossom into the one thing my daughter, in all her clever manipulations, was utterly unprepared for: real, official, and very public accountability. The call from Adult Protective Services came 2 days later. It was a man named David Chin, his voice calm, professional, and full of a quiet, reassuring authority. He introduced himself as the caseworker assigned to my report and asked if he could visit me at my apartment that afternoon. Mr. Chin was a man in his late 40s with kind, perceptive eyes that seemed to take in every detail of my situation in a single sweeping glance. The Spartan, unfamiliar apartment, my walker parked by the armchair, the way I winced slightly as I moved to let him in. He didn't treat me like a child nor like a victim. He spoke to me as an equal, a witness providing testimony. I recounted my story again, this time with the full, detailed context. I showed him the discharge papers from my hip surgery, which clearly outlined my need for ongoing assisted care. I explained the lie about the incontinence, the humiliation of the diapers, the cruelty of Monique's care transition, that had been in fact an abandonment. He listened, his expression growing more grave with each word. He was not just a bureaucrat, he was, I could tell, a man with a deep and genuine sense of justice. "Mrs. Powell," he said when I had finished, "thank you for your courage in reporting this. What you've described is a very serious case of neglect and psychological abuse." He made a few final notes in his file. "I have everything I need from you for now. My next step is to speak with your daughter, Mrs. Powell-Jones." "She will lie," I said simply. "She is a very convincing liar." A small, grim smile touched his lips. "I have a great deal of experience with convincing liars, Mrs. Powell," he said. "Don't you worry." I had assumed he would call her, schedule a meeting, perhaps a formal interview at his office. I had underestimated the strategic mind of Mr. David Chin. The very next afternoon, just after 2 o'clock, he walked into the gleaming glass and steel lobby of the downtown corporate tower where Monique worked as the head of human resources. He did not have an appointment. He approached the main reception desk, a place where Monique herself had likely hired and fired people, a place that was the very symbol of her professional success and authority. "I'm here to see Monique Powell-Jones," he said calmly to the receptionist. "My name is David Chin. I'm an investigator with the state's Adult Protective Services." The effect of those words, I was later told by a friend of a friend who worked on that floor, was electric. The receptionist's eyes widened. A hushed silence fell over the immediate area. The phrase, Adult Protective Services, is not one you hear in a corporate lobby without a jolt of alarm. Monique was called out from a meeting. She emerged, her face a mask of professional annoyance at the interruption, an expression that quickly morphed into one of pure, panicked horror when she saw who was waiting for her. Mr. Chin was polite, professional, and utterly relentless. In front of her colleagues, her subordinates, the very people whose careers she managed, he calmly, audibly stated his purpose. "Mrs. Powell-Jones," he said, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent open-plan office, "I am here to discuss a serious and urgent report of neglect and abandonment concerning a vulnerable adult under your care, your mother, Dorothy Powell. We will need a private conference room. Immediately." The humiliation was absolute. It was a direct, devastating strike at the heart of her carefully constructed professional identity. She was Monique Powell-Jones, the compassionate, competent HR manager, the woman who handled sensitive employee issues, who preached corporate responsibility. And she was now being publicly investigated for abandoning her own elderly mother. She tried to play it off, of course. She stammered, she protested, she attempted to frame it as a private family matter, a misunderstanding. But Mr. Chin was unmoved. He was an official agent of the state investigating a formal complaint, and he would not be deterred. She was forced to lead him, her face burning with a shame so profound it was almost visible, past the staring, whispering faces of her colleagues, into a glass-walled conference room. The transparent walls, a symbol of modern corporate transparency, now served as a fishbowl for her disgrace. Everyone could see her, trapped, being questioned by a government investigator. The interview, I learned, was a brutal dismantling of her lies. Mr. Chin presented her with the facts. Her mother's documented need for post-surgical care. Her sudden, unsupported relocation to a new apartment. He asked her to provide medical documentation for her mother's supposed incontinence and her unmanageable condition. She had none. He asked her to explain why her mother, a woman of sound mind, would feel the need to file a formal APS report if she was being cared for so lovingly. She had no answer. Her web of deceit, so effective when used against a heartbroken, isolated old woman, dissolved under the calm, professional scrutiny of an experienced investigator. Her lies were exposed not by a shouting match, not by a family drama, but by the quiet, inexorable turning of bureaucratic wheels she herself had set in motion with her cruelty. When Mr. Chin left her office an hour later, Monique's professional facade was in tatters. Her career, her reputation, her very identity as a competent, compassionate leader had been irrevocably damaged. The asshole daughter, as I had come to think of her, had finally been confronted by an authority she could not bully, could not manipulate, could not dismiss. The quiet phone call I had made from my lonely apartment had resulted in her worst nightmare, a public, professional, and utterly humiliating reckoning. The unannounced visit from Mr. Chin at Monique's office was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of her public and professional unraveling. An official investigation by Adult Protective Services is not a quiet affair. It is a meticulous, invasive process, and Monique, as both the accused and the head of human resources at a major corporation, was now at the center of a scandal she could not control. The investigation was thorough. Mr. Chin and his team interviewed me again, this time with a victim's advocate by my side. They spoke with my doctors, who confirmed my post-surgical needs and the complete absence of any medical basis for Monique's degrading lies. They interviewed my old friends like Janice, who testified to my sharp mind and the sudden, suspicious silence from my daughter. They even spoke to my neighbors, who confirmed that I had been a vibrant, independent woman before my fall, and a distressed, isolated one during my brief, traumatic stay at Monique's home. The case they built was damning. It painted a clear picture of a daughter who, burdened by the necessary care of her recovering mother, had fabricated a vile, humiliating lie to justify abandoning her. The official report cited psychological abuse, willful neglect, and endangerment of a vulnerable adult. The consequences for Monique were swift and severe. Her employer, horrified by the findings of the official investigation and the potential liability of having an HR manager accused of elder abuse, suspended her indefinitely. Her perfect career, the one she had prioritized over her own mother's dignity, was in ruins. Her professional reputation was destroyed. Faced with the undeniable evidence and the threat of potential legal charges, Monique and Mark were forced into a court-mediated settlement, overseen by APS. They had no choice but to agree to the terms laid out by my new pro bono lawyer, a woman arranged by Mr. Chen's office. The agreement was not about money. It was about my freedom and my safety. First, they were ordered to pay for and arrange my move into a comfortable, safe, and well-equipped assisted living apartment of my choosing, covering all my expenses for the first year to compensate for the emotional distress and financial instability they had caused. Second, a permanent restraining order was put in place, forbidding them from having any contact with me unless I initiated it. Third, and most satisfyingly, the judge ordered Monique to attend mandatory counseling and caregiver sensitivity training. My victory was complete, but it was a somber one. I found a beautiful little apartment in a vibrant senior community, a place filled with laughter, with activities, with new friends. I had my independence back. I had my dignity restored. My name was cleared. But I had lost my daughter. I knew with a certainty that still ached in my heart, that our relationship was likely broken beyond repair. One afternoon, about 6 months after I had moved into my new home, I received a letter. It was from Monique. It was not filled with excuses or justifications, but with a quiet, stilted, and for the first time seemingly genuine remorse. She spoke of her therapy, of the shame she felt, of the dawning, horrifying understanding of her own profound selfishness. I let my own impatience and my desire for an easy life turn me into a monster, Mom, she wrote. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just hope that one day you can find peace. I folded the letter and put it away. Perhaps one day forgiveness would be possible. But not today. Today was for me. My new life was quiet, but it was my own. I joined a book club. I took a pottery class. I made friends who valued my stories, who respected my wisdom. My revenge had not been a fiery confrontation, but a quiet, deliberate act of self-preservation. I had refused to be a victim. I had refused to be silenced. I had picked up the phone and, with a trembling voice, had spoken my truth to the one authority who would listen. They had tried to strip me of my dignity, to make me a caricature of a helpless, incontinent old woman. But they had failed. I was Dorothy Powell. I was a mother, a friend, a survivor. and I was finally blessedly free. My final years would not be defined by their cruelty, but by my own quiet, resilient peace. And that was a victory more profound than any revenge.